Bwana ni mwokozi wangu, tena ni kiongozi wangu.
Hello, how are you? Welcome to another interactive series of lectures from 255 Health with me, Dr. Elias Tito Minuka. Well, today we're going to talk about central nervous system examination. Well, as we know that the end of semester exams are fast approaching, so this central nervous system examination is normally really hard for students, but we're going to make it like a walk in the park. So pay attention so that you can get the best out of it. Yes, so let's get straight to the case. So in central nervous system examination, first of all, you have to go in while you're prepared. This is very important from the way you dress. Make sure you carry your equipment. Students normally forget this. It's a must-have. So make sure you have all the equipment necessary for central nervous system exam. For example, you should have your pen torch. You should have your patella hammer. You should have your tuning fork. See, you should have maybe you can have your otoscope, some people fundoscope, and maybe a visual acuity chart,
or otherwise known as Snell's chart.
So these are the things that you expect to have. Some of them might be expensive, but at least make sure you have the basics ones, and also make sure you have all the instruments for cranial nerve examination. So it's very, very, very important. So after that, you have to know the central nervous system exam is divided into higher centers, which include the brain, spinal cord, and lower centers below. So anything which is away from the brain and the spinal cord is taken into the lower center. So let's go through one part after the other. So when you start with the higher centers, you go to something called, very important, which is called you assess level of consciousness. This is very, very important. It's important to know if your patient is alert, it's very important to know if the patient is actually oriented to that place and everything. So you use the Glasgow Coma scale, which consists of 3 parameters, which start from verbal response, motor response, and eye opening. So all these will be determined, and most of the time the GCS score is out of 15. So if your patient is fully conscious, you have a Glasgow Coma scale of 15 over 15. So it is graded. For example, in eye opening, it goes from 1 to 4. And then verbal response goes from 1 to 5, and then motor response goes from 1 to 6. So when you add them up, you get a total of 15. So it's up for you to assess the patient based on those parameters to actually get to know the level of consciousness of your patient. Yes, so after the GCS score, you go to something called orientation. So you have to check if your patient is oriented to people, place, and time. So you can ask the patient, who am I? So if the patient identifies that maybe you are a doctor or medical personnel, that means orientation is okay. The place, where am I? Where are you at right now? The patient will tell me at the hospital. And you ask the patient also, what time of the day do you think it is? Maybe you say it's in the morning or what. So after this, you will be able to know to check actually for the orientation of the patient. After that, you can also check for something called judgment and attention. So how can you test this? Maybe you can tell a patient that I'm going to mention as many numbers as possible, but I want you to tell me how many times have I mentioned 1 in the sequence. So you start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 8, and then you tell how many times I've mentioned. So if he tells you that, okay, I've mentioned 1 twice, that means the level of attention is there. He was able to pick out. And then judgment, you can take maybe 2 cash. You can take a 500 coin and a 1,000 coin and 1,000 note, and then you can ask the patient to choose which one he would like. Obviously, he will take the larger one. So judgment and attention will be done. And then after there, you go to language. So in language, covers a lot of things. It covers about fluency of speaking. It covers about comprehension. It covers about even writing, as simple stuff like that. So maybe you can have your patient talk and you're able to judge about the language and things like that. And then after that, you have something called the mood of the patient. Mood of the patient. Very important. You should know, is the patient's mood congruent? Meaning, does the mood actually match with that current situation of a person? For example, you find people with mood disorders, sometimes they have a divergence of the congruencies. So that means the mood is not actually going together with that situation. So you find someone is in a very lonely situation, but he's just laughing his mind out. So that means the mood of the patient is also assessed there. And then also don't forget to also assess the behavior pattern. Yeah, so behavior pattern, you can actually just pick it up by observation. For example, you find a person, maybe you have these people, for example, the ones that maybe have convulsions, they have suffered severe episodes of epilepsy, people with Down syndrome, you have altered levels of behavior, especially at that time you see the patient. So I hope we're together until there. Since we're together, we're going to go to another part which is very important, my people. This one is cranial nerves examination. So cranial nerve examination is very important. So first, I'm going to write a statement which I really hate to see, and I'm going to put this in capital letters. That if someone tells me that all cranial nerves were intact, I always tell my students this. This is a very bad statement. You are not at the level of simplifying things. We normally simplify things, and especially doctors who are working in the hospitals, we're going through major rounds, so you don't expect to write everything down. But for your level, you're supposed to tell us the cranial nerves that you examined and how you examined, and if you found any abnormalities. So there's going to be a separate video on cranial nerve examination, but I'm just going to take the first 2 cranial nerves just as an example on how you can report. For example, the first one is maybe the olfactory nerve. So olfactory nerve is also known as the nerve which helps us to distinguish between different types of smell. You see, so you can have different types of materials which produce a certain type of smell. For example, you can have maybe a piece of soap, orange, banana, things like that. And then make sure in these cranial nerve exams, and you should always make sure your patient is not aware. So that means you close the patient's eyes and you tell the patient that I'm going to give you something. Can you tell me what's the smell that you identify? So if the patient was able to identify, you say that cranial number 1, which is a olfactory nerve, was not affected, as the patient was able to distinguish between different types of smell. So, for example, cranial nerve number 2, which is the optic nerve. So, in the optic nerve, you're going to look at different parameters. You're going to measure visual acuity. In this visual acuity, you are measuring about the ability of someone's eyes to see over different distances. First, so you can spread it out over 5 meters, maybe 2, 5, and 10 meters. And then maybe you can have that visual acuity chart, whereby you'd ask the patient to actually identify the letters which are on each sequence. If you don't have that, you can use your own fingers. So at the end of the day, maybe if you want to present this, maybe the optic nerve was affected, my patient was not able to see at shorter distances. So this will help us to know what type of problem this person is having in the optic nerve. And you can also talk about color distinction. So make sure you come in with a red pen, green, anything which has color, especially green, yellow, red, and blue. So the ability of that patient to distinguish the colors, that my patient was able to distinguish different colors.
You could use Ishihara color chart.
Accommodation, yes, and stuff like that, whereby the patient now you see, but after reflection of the pen touch, and the pupils will actually constrict and relax at different distances. I hope that's well understood. So I'll put a separate videos on cranial examination. We'll examine from cranial number 1 to cranial number 10. So you should make sure that you tell me that when you are reporting, you said I examined the following nerves: cranial number 1, the olfactory nerve, and the optic nerve, and so on and so on and so on. And you tell us what you did in those nerves and the findings that you found, and maybe if there are any abnormalities. I hope that's really well understood. So after that, my people, we're going to go to something else, and we're going to go to the sensory exam. So you're going to talk about the sensory exam. So what do we check on the sensory exam? Sensory exam, you examine different things. You can examine the reflexes. Note that these reflexes are two. You find the superficial and deep. So you should know the examples. For example, superficial, you can have the plantar reflex, and you can also have the corneal reflex. So for example, the corneal reflex, you just take a cotton bud or something, and then you try to just put it into the cornea, and you can find that person is actually automatically blinking. So in the deep reflexes, you can have the triceps. For example, in the deep, you can have the triceps, biceps, ankle, knee, even the jaw jerk reflex. So all these you're going to elicit, because at the end of the day, for example, when you have the triceps, biceps, especially the muscles of this side, which is supplied by the brachial plexus. So this will be able to tell you where the lesion is in terms of the nerve which is affected. Is it the median? Is it the radial nerve? Is it the ulnar nerve? Is it the musculocutaneous nerve? And it also will also help you to know about the muscles affected. It will also help you to know about the nerve roots, and it helps us to know about the trunks which are actually affected. So these are the sensory exams in the part of the reflexes. I hope it's well understood, my people. So after that, we're going to the same sensory. We're going to talk about what is this? We're going to talk about temperature discrimination. So in temperature, you know the hypothalamus is responsible for temperature regulation in our body. So that the patient should be able to differentiate between hot and cold objects. Very important, very, very important. For example, you can come with a cold bottle of water. While the patient is actually closing the eyes, you can put the bottle of water somewhere in the skin, and then you can ask the patient to actually tell you that what does the patient feel. And the same apply to hot water. You can take maybe tea or something, a cup of tea, ask the patient to touch it, maybe just in the cup of the outside, and the temperature will tell you that the patient can differentiate between temperature. And then there's also pain. This is very important. Is the patient able to sense pain? So you can have a pointed object which is used for eliciting pain, and then you can have the patients close their eyes, and then you can elicit the response. And there's also issue of pressure. Yes. So for example, remember in your general exam, whereby you're going to check for lymph node enlargements together with, in the lower limbs, you check for edema. So that's the application of pressure, especially the edema part. So you find any part of the body and you assess for the pressure, and if the patient feels it, then that's okay. So for example, here you have the baroreceptors, which are responsible.